How to sew the drawstring bag, part of the gift bag collection, available in 4 gorgeous Christmas prints. The drawstring bag is part of a collection of 4 beautiful bags in a range of sizes and shapes. Cutting out. Cut around the edge of all the drawstring bag fabric pieces from the printed panel. You will have the drawstring bag outer front and the outer back. You'll have 2 drawstring bag casing pieces and also a drawstring bag handle. Now you need to cut lining fabric pieces from your own fabric, so use them as templates. You place the drawstring bag outer front and back on top of the fabric, cut round it to make the drawstring bag lining front and back, and you'll need a length of ribbon as well. Making the casing. Take 1 drawstring bag casing and turn the short ends over by 1/2 inch to the wrong side. If you measure 1 inch inwards from the short end and mark that with a pin, then fold the short end over to match that, then you've folded it over exactly by 1/2 inch. Now press this into place. You can just use your fingers or use an iron and pin it into place, and then you're going to sew down that end. But turn the other end over by 1/2 inch, exactly the same, and then stitch down both sides just to hem the short edges. Now fold this casing piece in half lengthways with wrong sides facing and matching raw edges. Just give it a press to hold it. Then stitch along the length 1/2 inch in from the folded edge. This is going to be the casing for the cord. Make the other casing piece in exactly the same way. Now take the drawstring bag outer front and you need to place the casing in the centre of the top edge. So if you fold the top edge over and just make a little crease on the fold, place a pin there, that's the halfway point. You can measure it if you prefer, but this is just an easy way to do it. Take 1 casing piece, fold that in half so you find the centre of the raw edges, and place that right sides down. Match those centre marks and you know it's placed centrally. Now tack this into place across the top, and then repeat this with the other casing piece and the drawstring bag back so that you've got a casing tacked to the front of the bag and the back of the bag. Making the handle. Take the drawstring bag handle and fold it in half lengthways with right sides facing. Just press to crease the edge just to hold it together a bit, and then pin it together along the long edge, making sure those raw edges match up. Now stitch together down the length. Press the seam open and flat with it running down the centre of the back edge. Now I'm going to use a turning tube to turn my right sides out, so I've tacked together across 1 short end because it's easier to do that if you do this. Poke the stick through and that turns the tube right sides out. Remove the tacking stitches from the end and then you can take the stick out of the handle tube. Now press the handle so that the seam runs down the centre of the back edge, and then top stitch along the top and the bottom. That's just to neaten and decorate it. Now just trim off the tiniest bit from the ends just to remove the frayed edges and to give you a nice straight end. It's just easy for inserting the handle with straight end to finish. Assembling the bag. Pin the drawstring bag outer front and the drawstring outer back right sides facing. These already have the casing attached. Match up the side raw edges and pin together. Then match up the bottom raw edges and pin together. And then put another pin in the centre. And then pin together up the other sides. The casing doesn't come into those seams because it comes within, so you don't need to worry about matching that up. Now stitch together down the sides, across the bottom and up the other side. Now press the seams open. It will just help them to lie flat and you'll get a neater finish. Turn the outer right sides out and push your fingers in to push out the corners. Now we're going to attach the handle to the bag outer. So measure 1/4 of an inch down from the top of the handle at either end. This is the amount that the handle is going to extend above the top outer to make it more secure when you're using it and carrying it. Now place one end of the handle, right sides facing, on top of the side seam of the bag. That's between the casing. The handle isn't quite as wide as that gap, so make sure you place it centrally so that you've got the same amount of fabric either side. You can measure to do this or you can mark. Or you can just guess by it. It's only a little bit, but just make sure that the handle is extending 1/4 of an inch above the raw edge and it's also placed centrally on top of the seam. Once you've pinned it at the top, pin it a little further down just to hold it straight. Now loop the handle round the bottom of the bag, making sure it stays straight and it's not twisted. And repeat this on the other side. So the handle needs to extend 1/4 of an inch above the raw edge and it needs to be placed centrally between the two casing pieces so it's sitting centrally on top of the seam. Pin it together at the top and a little bit further down. Now tack the ends of the handle into place. You can see that it loops round and just holds the outer, but it makes sure it's not twisted. Now you can see here I've tacked the handle at the top and a little bit further down and it's looping round. Now we're going to make the lining. So take the lining front and the lining back that you cut earlier and place them right sides facing. Pin together down the sides and across the bottom. Now you need to leave a turning gap in the lining for turning right sides out. So we'll leave that in the base. So if you fold the base in half to find the centre, then measure 2 inches either side of this centre. And then that will leave a 4-inch gap. Place vertical pins in this position so you don't forget to leave the gap unstitched. Now stitch the lining pieces together down the side, up to one side of the turning gap, leave that unstitched, start stitching at the other side and back up the other side. So this is what your lining will finish looking like. Press the seams open, particularly those on either edge of the turning gap, because it makes it easier to sew it closed later. Now take the outer that you made earlier with the handle attached and place that inside the lining so that they are right sides facing. Now you need to pin them together, but what you've got to do is match up those side seams on the lining with the side seams of the outer. Obviously you've got the handle in between, but you can push a pin through the lining seam and make sure it comes out at the outer seam. And you can just move it over slightly if it doesn't. And then place a pin in place. Turn it round and do the same on the other seam. It's important that you get these seams matching up so the lining sits properly inside the outer. So we'll push a pin through the lining, check to see if it comes through the outer, move it aside until it does, and then pin it together. Now pin it together all the way along the top, but make sure the handle is facing downwards and that you don't get it caught in the seam. So rearrange the bag, just push your hand inside, and that will push the lining right down. Making sure all the raw edges match up, pin it together all the way along the top. Just keep adjusting it to make sure that the raw edges are matching. Then once that's done, sew it together all the way around the top. Now you can see they're joined together. I have folded the lining over a little bit and pressed it just to press the seam open. Now pull out the outer from the lining and then put your hands inside the turning gap, grab hold of the bottom of the outer and pull it right sides out through that turning gap. Now push your hands inside so that you can push out those corners of the drawers of the bag, because it's easier to do this whilst the turning gap is unstitched. And just open out the corners of the lining as well. Now, because you pressed the turning gaps inwards earlier, it will be easy to just make sure the turning gaps are matching up, the edges are folded inwards, and pin them together. Now you can machine stitch this closed or slip stitch it closed by hand. I've top stitched it closed. Now push the lining inside the outer and then put your fingers in to push the corners of the lining right into the corners of the outer so it's staying faced all the way down. Undo the extra row of tacking stitches on the handle that you put in earlier just to hold it straight, because the handle needs to be facing upwards at this stage. And then undo the tacking stitches on the other side of the handle. Now make sure the lining is sitting right inside the bag. You'll need to push it downwards to do this. It will also help if you press it at this stage. So push it all downwards to make sure the lining is going right inside and isn't sticking up above. Pressing it will help. Now stitch into place just below the top of the outer. Don't stitch into the casing, but just a little bit below the top edge of the outer. So this will hold the lining in place. So if you look here, you can see I've just top stitched all the way around the top of the outer, not into the casing, and that just holds the lining down. Now take your ribbon and cut it in half. The quantity you need for this is listed in the ingredients. Take 1/2 of the ribbon and put a safety pin through it. Now, starting at one side of the casing, push the safety pin through the gap and thread it all the way through the casing. So this is the gap that's at the bottom of the casing. You stitched this gap earlier. You don't put it through the top because that's like a little frill. Push the ribbon underneath the handle and then push it through the bottom of the casing gap on the other side. Once it's all the way through, pull the ribbon out so that the ends are level. You can remove the safety pin now, and then tie the ends of the ribbon together just to secure them for now. We can adjust the knot later, but just to stop it coming undone. So just tie them loosely together. Now take the other length of ribbon and put the safety pin in the end of it. And starting at the other side of the casing gap, so the one where you've got the looped bit of ribbon in, not the end with the knot, and push the safety pin through, again through the bottom casing, not through the top because that will make a little frill, but through the bottom part of the casing. Obviously you've already got some ribbon inside, so you might just have to ease it. It's a little bit harder to ease it through, but it will go through. And then come out at the other side of the casing. Take the ribbon and put it behind the handle and then push it through the other side of the casing. Once you've come out the other side like this, pull it all the way through just like you did before. Remove the safety pin and then tie the ends in a knot, but making sure that you tie them behind the handle, not in front of it. It just will pull up better if you do that. Tie the ends in a knot loosely like you did before so that you can adjust them in if needs be. Open out the bag and make sure that the ribbon is flat and you haven't tied it too short. So just make sure it's nice and flat inside. And once you're happy with that, tighten up the knot. You can then trim the ends of the ribbon. I do this by folding them in half lengthways and cutting from the fold to the outer points, and then you get little V's. So if you fold the ribbon in half lengthways and cut from the fold towards the outside of the ribbon, you get little V's. This stops the ribbon from fraying and it also looks pretty. So once you've trimmed both ends, you can then pop your gift inside and pull up the ribbon to close. If you pull both ends at the same time, it will gather it. And then you've got the little handle at the top, and what a pretty little gift bag. There we go, all ready for your favourite gifts.